It started as nothing more than a passing joke. In a quiet school auditorium, a group of teachers thought they were being clever when they handed a violin to a simple woman who had never once spoken about music or shown any sign of talent. They expected laughter, a harmless bit of entertainment to fill the dull afternoon. Some even whispered that she might embarrass herself trying to hold the instrument. But what none of them realized was that behind her humble silence, she carried a secret that would change the mood of the entire room. The violin sat in her hands awkwardly at first, and a few smirks spread across the faces of those watching. The teachers leaned back, ready to enjoy their little prank. They believed they already knew how the scene would play out: wrong notes, hesitation, and a few chuckles to follow. But there was something in her eyes, a quiet determination, as if the moment meant far more to her than anyone could guess. The first sound that escaped the strings made the room shift. It wasn't the clumsy screech they were expecting. It was soft, steady, and filled with something almost unexplainable. One by one, the smirks faded, replaced by silence. Every teacher who had laughed now leaned forward, caught off guard by what they were hearing. This was no accident, no lucky stroke of sound. She was playing with heart, with soul, and with a depth that spoke louder than words. In that instant, the joke turned into shock, and the prank turned into regret. What began as a way to mock her was about to leave everyone speechless. And as the music grew stronger, they realized they had uncovered a side of her no one ever imagined. The room grew colder in its silence as every note filled the air. None of the teachers could look at each other, because in their hearts they already knew they had misjudged her. Yet curiosity began to rise. Who was this woman, really? She had always been seen as ordinary, someone who kept to herself, never asking for attention. She cleaned the halls, helped where she could, and most people barely noticed when she passed by. To them, she was invisible. But now, with the violin resting against her shoulder, she was commanding the entire room without saying a single word. Whispers started to circle among the teachers at the back. How did she learn to play like this? Why had she never mentioned it before? A few remembered hearing vague rumors that in her younger years she had once dreamed of music, but no one had taken the time to ask her directly. Others simply assumed she had no special talent at all. That assumption was now shattering with every graceful stroke of the bow. The more she played, the more the atmosphere changed. The sound carried not just skill, but emotion, sorrow, longing, and strength, all woven together. It was as if her life story was pouring out through the strings, telling a tale no one had bothered to listen to until now. Some of the younger teachers felt their hearts tighten, realizing that what they had treated as a joke was actually uncovering something extraordinary. Still, she kept her eyes closed, lost in the music, as though the auditorium and the people in it had vanished. The teachers, however, couldn't look away. They leaned in closer, waiting for what might come next, unsure if they were witnessing a hidden gift or the beginning of something even greater. The longer she played, the more the weight of the moment pressed down on the teachers. Some felt guilt creeping in, realizing how quickly they had turned her into the target of a joke. Others, however, were unsettled for a different reason. If someone so overlooked could carry such talent, what else might they have ignored? The unspoken question spread among them: had they underestimated more than just her? One of the senior teachers shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had been the one who first suggested handing her the violin. At the time, it seemed harmless, even amusing. But now, with each note echoing like a quiet accusation, he wondered if his reputation would suffer when word of this moment spread. Around him, a few teachers began whispering nervously, already imagining how the story might travel beyond the school walls. They had tried to laugh at her, but now the laughter would turn on them. Meanwhile, a younger teacher in the corner felt something else: admiration. She remembered seeing the woman linger near the music room in the evenings, dusting shelves slowly, almost as if listening for sounds no one else could hear. Perhaps this wasn't a coincidence at all. Maybe music had always been her hidden world, a place she carried silently while others ignored her presence. The students, who had been sitting in the back rows, now watched wide-eyed. They had caught on to the tension, sensing that something deeper was unfolding. For them, This wasn't just about music, it was about seeing their teachers unsettled for the first time. A strange power shift was happening, and though the woman remained calm, the entire room felt caught in a storm they hadn't expected. And still, she played on, her music rising and falling like a question that no one yet dared to answer. The music began to swell, filling every corner of the auditorium with a force that none of them expected. What started as gentle notes now carried power, rising like a storm that shook the silence into submission. The woman's bow moved faster, her fingers pressing the strings with precision, and each sound seemed to pull the listeners deeper into her world. No one dared to move. Even breaths were held back, as if making the slightest noise would break the spell she had cast over them. The senior teacher who had pushed the joke the hardest felt his throat tighten. He glanced at his colleagues, searching for someone who still found the situation amusing, but there were no smiles left. Instead, he saw worry, and a flicker of fear. If this performance reached beyond the room, their mockery would not be forgotten. It would be remembered as cruelty against a woman who had just proven herself extraordinary. His palms began to sweat, but he stayed seated, trapped by the very moment he had created. The students, who had been silent observers until now, leaned forward, their faces glowing with wonder. To them, this wasn't just music, it was defiance. A quiet woman had stepped into the spotlight without asking, and she had turned a cruel trick into a lesson. Some of them exchanged glances, almost giddy with the realization that the power dynamics of their small world were shifting right before their eyes. The younger teacher felt her chest tighten with both admiration and anticipation. She knew something was about to break. Either the performance would end with an explosion of applause, or with tension that could not be ignored. Every rising note pushed the room closer to that edge, where emotions ran high and unspoken regrets filled the air. And then, just as the music reached its highest pitch, she lifted her eyes for the first time, locking her gaze on the very teachers who had mocked her. The bow quivered in her hand, the strings sang louder, and in that instant, the entire room braced for what was about to come. The room froze as her eyes met theirs, but then something unexpected happened. Instead of slowing, her playing grew sharper, fiercer, carrying a fire none of them had anticipated. It was no longer just music. It was a challenge. Every stroke of the bow seemed to demand an answer from those who had doubted her. The teachers shifted in their seats, but before they could gather their thoughts, the auditorium doors creaked open. In walked the headmaster, drawn by the sound that echoed through the halls. He paused at the back, listening, his expression unreadable. The teacher stiffened instantly, realizing that if he discovered the truth of how this moment began, their reputations could be shattered. What had started as a private joke was now slipping beyond their control, witnessed by someone who held real authority. The woman, however, didn't flinch. If anything, the intensity of her performance grew, as though she knew exactly what her music was exposing. The students noticed the headmaster too, whispering to one another with wide eyes. They sensed the weight of what was happening. The prank had turned into a stage, and the teachers were no longer in charge of the story. One teacher leaned forward and whispered harshly, "We have to stop this before it goes too far." But none dared interrupt her now, not with the headmaster watching, not with the entire room caught in her rhythm. The woman's violin sang on, a voice stronger than words, and with each note the tension climbed higher. The headmaster's gaze moved from her to the trembling teachers, and then back to her again. The silence between the notes grew heavier, as if he was piecing together the truth. The stakes had shifted. What began as a cruel joke was no longer just about music. It was about pride, dignity, and a reckoning that none of them could escape. Her final notes rose like a wave, crashing over the auditorium in a sound so powerful it left everyone breathless. The violin seemed to cry and soar all at once, and when the last vibration faded into silence, the room erupted, not in laughter as the teachers once imagined, but in thunderous applause from the students. Even the headmaster, who rarely showed emotion, brought his hands together slowly, his eyes fixed on her with a look of respect. The woman lowered the violin with calm grace, her gaze still steady on the row of teachers who had mocked her. Their faces were pale, caught between shame and fear, knowing the truth was plain for everyone to see. They had tried to turn her into the punchline of a joke, but she had answered them with music that none of them could deny. The headmaster took a step forward, his voice firm yet calm. "It seems," he said, "that the greatest lesson today did not come from the teachers." His words cut sharper than any reprimand, and the teachers lowered their heads, their authority slipping away in front of the very students they had hoped to impress. But just as the tension seemed to settle, another twist revealed itself. From the back of the auditorium, an older man with gray hair rose from his seat. Few had noticed him slip in earlier, but now his presence commanded attention. He carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone important, and when he spoke, his voice trembled with emotion. "That song," he said softly, "was the same piece your mother once played in her final concert." The woman froze, her eyes widening as the room fell silent again. The students, the teachers, even the headmaster leaned forward, realizing the story was not yet finished. The music had revealed her gift, but now it had also uncovered a secret connection no one expected, one that promised to change everything they thought they knew about her. The room went still as the man's words sank in. The woman's hands trembled slightly as she held the violin close to her chest. For years, she had hidden her past, carrying the memory of her mother quietly, never speaking of it because she believed no one would care. Now, in front of those who once overlooked her, the truth had surfaced in the most unexpected way. The older man stepped forward, revealing himself to be a former music teacher who had known her family long ago. His eyes shone with pride as he explained how her mother had been a gifted violinist whose legacy seemed lost, until now. The students whispered in awe, realizing the woman they barely noticed was connected to something greater than any of them had imagined. The teachers, however, shifted uncomfortably, weighed down by their guilt. Their prank had exposed not weakness, but a hidden strength that left them humbled. One of them finally rose and spoke quietly, apologizing for the way they had treated her. The woman listened but said nothing, letting the silence speak louder than words. The headmaster stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. He announced that the school would honor her by inviting her to guide students in music if she chose to share her gift. For the first time, she felt seen not as the simple woman, but as someone with value, someone who carried history and talent worth remembering. As she left the stage, the applause followed her, not out of pity, but out of genuine respect. What began as a joke had turned into a lesson that none would forget, that true talent often hides in plain sight, and dignity shines brightest when tested. The violin had spoken, and its echo would remain with them forever.